Coming up next on American Black Journal, we'll take an in-depth look at the facts behind last year's homicides in Detroit. Who's committing the murders and why? What are the common threads behind the violence, and how can we as a community make the city safer? It's a discussion you don't want to miss, so stay tuned.
Lindsay wants to know.
So I'm curious, what's DTE Energy doing to improve their customer service?
Why don't we take a ride over there and let Rachel tell us? Hello.
Hello. Take a walk with me. Here at DTE Energy, we're working very hard to improve our service, like answering every call under 1 minute and resolving the issue on the first call.
Wow, no passing the buck, huh?
Nope. And plus, we're adding over 100 customer service jobs right here in the state of Michigan.
I need to get a real job.
I'm going to send your application.
Thanks, Rachel. DTE Energy. Know your own power.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. The Detroit Police Department just completed a comprehensive analysis of the 386 criminal homicides recorded in the city last year. A close examination of these crimes underscores the need for better conflict resolution efforts in our neighborhoods, and it calls attention to the high number of African American males who are dying in urban cities. Detroit Police Department data show almost half of the city's homicide victims knew their assailants. In fact, for the past 3 years, an average of 45% of homicides involved a victim and a perpetrator who were acquainted. Anger or arguments were the motives for 37% of the city's murders last year, indicating the need for nonviolent conflict resolution in troubled neighborhoods. And 78% of homicide victims last year were black males. Black females comprised the next largest group at almost 11%. These homicide trends are being duplicated in cities across America, so they're not just here in Detroit. Joining me to talk about this data are Inspector Dwayne Blackman, Commanding Officer of the Detroit Homicide Unit, and Dr. Carl S. Taylor, Professor of Sociology at Michigan State University. Welcome to American Black Journal.
Thank you.
This is obviously a very serious issue. We heard the mayor this week talk some about in two ways. One, how he wants to reorganize the police department to get more officers on the street, thinking that that will help. But also, he talked a lot about how this is not just a police problem. He talked about the number of people who are involved in these homicides who know each other, and that points to a more community issue that doesn't really have to do with police.
Yeah, absolutely. What the mayor is trying to get individuals to understand is that it's a holistic problem. You know, the police play a role in this,
right?
But it requires individuals to realize that they are preying upon themselves. It's within the neighborhoods. These are individuals that may not have as much as the other person who's actually perpetrating.
Right.
So what the mayor wants them to understand, and what we're asking them to understand, is the fact that look upon yourself as a solution and not just the police department.
And what would that mean? I mean, if I live in a neighborhood over on the east side where you know it's really the sort of near east and west sides where we see the highest concentration of these murders every year. If I'm living on a block on one of those streets, what is it that you think I could do to help fight this problem, but also to help the police?
Well, you know, there's this no snitch attitude
Sure.
that's within the neighborhood.
Right.
And one of the problems that I definitely understand is that there's fear of retaliation.
Right.
But the problem that when you don't snitch, or excuse me, when I won't even use terminology of snitch,
Right.
but when you don't give the information that's necessary to get that perpetrator in custody, he's capable of perpetrating more throughout the neighborhood.
Right.
So what you're actually allowing to happen is that you're allowing more crime to continue. And one of the things the police are only as good as their community who provide that information. And so if the community is going to help itself, it has to police itself also. It has to realize that the information that you have is important to get that perpetrator off the street so that he doesn't continue to prey upon others in the neighborhood.
Right. Dr. Taylor, you've spent an awful long time thinking and writing and speaking about this culture of violence and sort of what drives it. Tell me, as somebody who, as we were talking before the show, a lifelong Detroiter, all three of us, in fact, are lifelong Detroiters, or were born here at least. Tell me, is there something about Detroit that makes it different from other cities where we see this, or is this just an urban, quote-unquote, problem that you'd find anywhere?
Well, I think there's no question that it is an urban problem, that what we see in Detroit, even look at the president's home of Chicago,
sure,
on the south side, that we're having a tremendous amount of violence and homicide there. So it's an urban problem. Detroit is unique because we may be the leader, because I can go all the way back before the riots, but once the riot took place in 1967, those social levees burst.
Sure.
And we saw things from, we're a hard blue-collar town, working class. But along with that comes the values that the black community brought from the South, which are really our base, our anchor, those black Christian social values.
Sure.
And we have run afoul. We're not looking at that. So a lot of the things that we are asking from people, quite frankly, they have not been socialized. And while this is a confrontation of authority and police, this really is about socialization. You know, a lack of civility.
Right.
And also a lack of education.
And in Detroit, I mean, one of the dynamics that I think has driven violence quite a bit is the depopulation. That people who are not likely to be involved in these violent crimes are the ones who are leaving, and increasingly, what's left are the people who are involved in the things that get them caught up in that. So that it's almost like an accelerant. When you have people leaving, that things are going to get more.
Absolutely, and I think those that leave will not accept the behavior. But many of those who stay are accustomed, have normalized this ignorance and the violence. So we understand, for example, when I was coming up on the west side, my dad didn't let my brothers and I fight each other.
Right.
Some people think that it was okay. My dad said, no, you're going to have a whole world that you have to fight. But they laid the law. But not only was the law in our house, this was the law in the northwest section of Detroit,
sure,
in the community. So if Mr. Henderson saw us, Mr. Henderson said, okay. And we said, please don't tell my dad or my mom, because you understand. Those values now have reversed themselves, where people are very quickly to tell you, don't say anything to my kid. But worse than that, we have many parental units and people and families that cheerlead and encourage this ignorance and this violence. That has to be addressed directly.
And when you say addressed directly, what do you do about that? What are some things that anyone living in the city could do to try to be part of that solution?
Well, that's a tough question, Stephen, because we assume that everyone is playing from the same playbook.
Right, and they're
not.
Right.
And so I think that many people thrive on confrontation and these types of things. We have to do something similar to like Peace Corps and other. We have to communicate. Communication is really important. However, we have to say, this is what we'll help you do, but we will not negotiate violence. And that's child abuse, verbal abuse, all of that goes along. And we have to be able to stick up to what we're saying. We also have to teach young people and communities that if you refuse to stop the violence, then we have to isolate you and make you a social pariah. That's what we used to do.
Sure.
We don't do that anymore now. We celebrate the ignorance through music, videos, the type of misogynistic attitude that we have towards women. But we enjoy ignorance now. That's something before that wasn't happening. My mother and others like that, boy, what are you doing? You straighten that up. You don't speak like that. And you don't look at young women like that. And you don't be woofing calls. And the community was very strong. Teachers were godlike, authority figures. We had a pecking order. Even if the inspector here, you can say he's younger than I am, I'm the older one, that if I was a nerd and he was a cool guy in the hood, he still did not have permission to do things to me because I'm the older guy and he had to respect the pecking order. Right. We have no pecking order now.
Yeah. You know, and one of the things that we've noticed is you don't have the intervention. You know, as the doctor indicated, there are things that are happening in the neighborhood and people are observing those things, but there's no one intervening and stopping that person from going down that path.
Right.
Because, you know, as you said, you know, your grandmother, your neighbor, somebody will say, you know, boy, stop that. You know, telling other adults, I saw him do this.
Right.
Okay, but you know what's happening now is that no one is saying anything about the crimes, and they could be petty in regards to a younger individual. He could be in the preteen.
Right.
He could be doing something that is demonstrating where he's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years.
Right.
However, no one is addressing that person and saying, hey, you need to stop. This is the path that's going on the wrong way. You know, and just in our opportunities to interrogate individuals and speak to them, what we saw is that we have young people who are involved in crime, but as the doctor indicated, the adult who would be their
That's okay. Is that your phone? Let's get that turned off.
I thought I turned it off.
You know, I hear exactly what you're saying about in terms of that intervention and it not being there, but I sort of want to turn the conversation a little bit to we've heard a lot in recent years about cities like New York, cities like Washington D.C., where you have seen a real turnaround in terms of murders, at least, going down. I don't know what the trend is in those cities for other violent crimes, but New York in particular this year has recorded the lowest number of murders, I think, since the early 1960s.
Yes.
I think 418 for a population of, I think, 8
Yes.
million. You look at that as compared to Detroit, where we had almost 400 murders with 715,000 people. What is the difference? Why is it that in New York they've been able to get on top of this, or is it not what they're doing? Is it some other driver? And why have we not been able to do it in Detroit?
Let me answer that from a law enforcement perspective. New York has established certain standards in far as their what they will not accept criminally.
Okay.
And one of the things that I can tell you for sure that over 80% of our homicides are gun related.
Right.
New York gun laws are very stringent.
Right.
Prime example, Plexico Barris, the football player,
Sure.
who shoots himself
Right.
with a gun that he does not have registered to him. So what did they do?
And winds up in prison.
And winds up in prison for 2 years.
Right.
That is something that tells you that they will not tolerate an individual with an illegal weapon.
Right.
And countless persons have been arrested from Detroit that have illegal weapons on them. And it starts there. And I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. And so is it that we don't have the laws on the books to prosecute those people in the same way, or is it that we're not good at using the laws that are already on the books to make sure that those people suffer some sort of consequence?
There are laws on the books. There are laws that will address the crime of guns being in the possession. And this is an area that I think everyone is aware of, but the court systems are overburdened.
Sure.
With the numbers of persons that are being brought in with guns. And there are other ways I know they've looked at other ways to try to address that issue.
Right.
Other than just incarcerating them.
Right. Right.
But at some point, there has to be some decision made that incarceration on certain individuals who have repeatedly shown that they are going to carry a gun regardless
Sure.
has to be done.
And there's a very tight connection between, and this may be obvious, but there's a very tight connection between people who are caught with illegal guns and people who commit shooting crimes or murders, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's who's doing it.
Absolutely. The guns that have been, when we do our analysis, we're not doing the analysis just for people to see and
Right.
think that this is statistics. There's a reason why we're looking at certain things.
Right.
And what we also notice is the gun possessors, the people who are carrying these weapons, and the age groups. And those ages are ranging from 17 to probably 30.
Right. Right.
But now the question should be, how are these guns getting into?
How are they getting to their right? And they're not going to the gun store plunking down
Absolutely.
$600 and going through a background check. I mean, there's a funnel of
Absolutely.
guns from that legal sale to illegal.
Absolutely, and from that position, as far as law enforcement, those are the things that when you ask the question about New York and how they're able to reduce the number of their homicides, what I've noticed is that the way you can reduce a homicide is not have that person commit another homicide.
Right.
Because what we see is that the individuals who commit one homicide, becomes easier for them to commit the second.
To do it again.
And if you can identify them, get them off the street, get them into a position to where they don't have the opportunity to commit another homicide, you can reduce that number.
Right. You know, Dr. Taylor, one of the things that strikes me about places like New York and Washington, I've always thought that those cities have more of an organized gang culture than we would typically describe in a place like Detroit, and yet they've been able to lower their homicide numbers. Is there again? I asked the inspector about police tactics. Is there something community-wise that's happening in those places that's not happening here?
Well, first I would dare not. He is the police expert. I'm
Sure,
not, so I'm not going to go over to that over there,
Right.
because he does an excellent job, and definitely under the circumstances. I mean that. I'm not sure that those are good comparisons, to be honest with you. When you talk about New York City after 9/11, you had a tremendous amount of resources to make certain that 9/11 wouldn't happen again. You have cameras everywhere. I actually saw a homicide in New York where the young man had the hood on. He walked up, shot the guy. They had it on camera. They had him in less than 8 hours because they had the cameras.
Right.
The cost of. We're forgetting something that's really, I think, very unfair. Resources. They have a lot of money.
Sure.
And that population in Manhattan is not the population in Detroit.
Right.
We're talking about an upper echelon with money. I'm not even certain the scare tactic of, with all due respect, and of course, I'm a Spartan, and Plaxico is a former student of mine. He was wrong for carrying a gun, no question about it. But Plaxico was not a threat to society. And to use him as a scare tactic, and it's a young African-American male, to put him in prison for 2 years, to me, is nonsensical. He should have been punished, but in a better way. And I think that's the point about Manhattan. When you look at Bloomberg, you're not looking at Detroit, Stephen.
Sure.
You're talking about a lot of money. And the same thing applies to Washington, D.C. You're looking at what houses the President of the United States. You're looking at senators. The core of our thinking, of our political thinking is there. So, of course, it is protected.
It's a safer place.
Talk to me about Black D.C. Talk to me about East Baltimore. Talk to me about the South Side of Chicago.
Right.
We need to talk about poverty. We need to talk about education and the destabilization of these families. Someone has to step up and stop doing the reports and the task force about, well, the family is this, the family is that. The family is in real trouble.
Sure.
And we have to have someone that can speak to that and also speak to the prison community. 3/4 of those who are incarcerated who've been in trouble with guns are coming back.
They come back at some point.
What
Sure.
have we taught them in terms of conflict resolution? That is really serious.
Right.
And so this is a very complex problem.
Yes.
So I just think that New York is not a good, and I look at Bloomberg and come on TV very arrogantly. I have to say we don't tolerate this with guns. Guns is really secondary to me. What is of primary concern is the thinking.
It's the thinking that goes
The thinking.
behind.
You understand? That, when I was a young boy coming along, if I saw, God help me, seriously, a Stephen Henderson, an editor of the Free Press, we would stop whatever we were doing and say, hello, Mr. Henderson, we'd be glad to see you, right? But since we have no pecking order, we have this telephone, this portable phone is not a telephone. This is an information system that allows young men to make their own heroes. You have to look at what Tupac talked about as a thug. And Tupac said that a thug was not a criminal.
Right. No.
He said he was the underdog. Well, that's distorted. I wonder what he would say today.
Sure.
But so I think it's the total lack of respect for authority, one who does not respect his or herself, the fact that we would hurt our elders, that we kill children.
Sure.
We had the ignorance even in this incident, which I shouldn't speak of, where the 7-year-old little girl was killed, and we're pointing at the police, but no one is looking at the ignorance or the fact that the father, who's the guardian of that child,
Had her in that
he
situation.
brought that to his doorstep.
Sure.
Stephen, you're a father. Would you bring that to your home? Absolutely not.
Right.
Any good mother, any good parent, The parents in Detroit, the good people in Detroit, are no different than the good people in Newtown, Massachusetts.
Right.
They love their children. But we are not taking a direct hit and bringing in those who decide they want to be thugging is not acceptable.
Right, right. You talk about conflict resolution. That's a term we hear a lot. I don't know that people really understand what that is, or how do you teach that? If it's not happening in the home, where is it that people learn to do that?
Well, I think that when we look at the erosion of public education, when we talk about we have ridiculous laws that says that if a young person has a gun, we kick him out of school for a whole year. We have to take those individuals, despite what people say, less government, that child who is ignorant is the responsibility of the family, and if they fail, then it is society. I have to sit down and talk with this child. I have to use young men who've been in prison, in street, and are redeemed to help them understand, to communicate, this is not negotiable. If you do this, you're going to be punished.
Right.
But more than that, it also has to take, I have a wonderful young scholar with me, and she's sitting in the audience there, Pamela Smith, who's looking at young girls. We're looking at young girls and we're saying, you have a lot of power. No matter how good Stephen Henderson looks, you're not going out with him if he's violent. Seriously.
Right.
Seriously.
Right.
And if Stephen is carrying a gun, then you say no. It's going to take a lot of different attacks, but we do not talk to the people that we really need to talk to. Every time we want to talk to the best student, the best musician,
right,
the best athlete. It's the reversal. We must talk to the worst student, the worst kid, someone. If I can't talk to him, then I ask the inspector. If they can't talk to him, then you have to talk. Some of these young men I can't talk to.
Right, right. Yeah, go ahead.
No, as a doctor definitely stated, this issue behind what we see, this epidemic and increase, is more than, as I stated before, it's more than a law enforcement perspective.
Yeah, right.
Putting a person in jail for whatever period of time is not going to solve the problem.
Right, because they will come back.
Because they're going to come back.
They need to have a better way to deal with issues.
Absolutely. The conflict resolution issue is something that, when I grew up, my mother taught me conflict resolution.
Sure. I would imagine that in all of our cases, it was our parents who taught us how to deal with
She taught me how to deal with the conflict.
Sure.
And one of the ways is that you're going to do it this way. This is how you're going to live your life, especially under my roof.
Right.
So, if I had a conflict with my siblings, it was resolved in the way that both of us were either going to, one of us either won or lost, but the bottom line was it was going to be resolved in the way that she knew,
in an appropriate
way.
That's right.
So when you take that out in the street, you realize that in order for you to survive, you have to also resolve that conflict.
I wonder, we hear a lot in Detroit about the low number of officers that we have right now. 10, 15, 20 years ago, we were a city of more people, but also almost double the number of uniformed officers. How key is that to fighting this?
I think the key to that would be when you're looking at what some of the conflicts that happen in the neighborhood, and the fact that if the police are called to intervene, that because of the other more serious crimes that are occurring, it doesn't allow you the opportunity to intervene on those smaller things before they escalate into an issue.
Right.
So, once you have the ability to address the small conflicts, you may have the ability to stop.
You can stop the larger stuff,
yes.
Right? Yeah. And so, I mean, the short answer then is that we could use more.
Yes, you without a doubt.
Police.
But it is more about. It's more than just having the police. It's deploying them properly.
It's deploying them right.
And we talk about the map, data-driven deployment, but it all comes down to really having that personal contact with the people in the neighborhood, so that they can rely and trust that when if I call you about a situation, you're going to come.
You're going to be there.
You're going to be there.
You're going to solve the problem.
Absolutely. You're going to address that issue.
Yeah. We could go on for hours, I'm sure, but we're out of time. I want to thank you both for being here. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Before we say goodbye, we here at American Black Journal would like to extend our sympathy to the families of 3 African-American pioneers who we recently lost. Gilbert Maddox was the original producer of this program back in 1968, along with another Detroit public television show called Black and Unknown Bards. He later became WWJ-TV's first African-American producer and host with a show called Profiles in Black. Photojournalist extraordinaire Hugh Granum worked at the Detroit Free Press for 37 years and received many honors for his work. As an educator and mentor, Hugh leaves behind a legacy for Detroit and future journalists. And award-winning documentary producer Ted Talbert founded the Joe Louis Video Memorial Room at Cobo Center. Talbert was inducted into Michigan's Journalism Hall of Fame in 2000. We thank these 3 men for their important contributions to Detroit's history. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on American Black Journal.
Lindsay wants to know.
So I'm curious, what's DTE Energy doing to improve their customer service?
Why don't we take a ride over there and let Rachel tell us? Hello.
Hello. Take a walk with me. Here at DC Energy, we're working very hard to improve our service, like answering every call under 1 minute and resolving the issue on the first call.
Wow, no passing the buck, huh?
Nope. And plus, we're adding over 100 customer service jobs right here in the state of Michigan.
I need to get a real job.
I'm going to send your application.
Thanks, Rachel. DTE Energy. Know your own power.